Okay, we're back now. Luke chapter 5. We're going to be starting with Luke 5, verse 27 today with Levi and the tax collectors and sinners, and hopefully we'll finish up chapter 5 today. But before we do that, let's just do a quick review, going back, not all the way back, but back to the beginning of Christ's ministry. So we have chapters 1 and 2 is the birth narrative and how he was born, the prophecies to Zechariah, to Mary, those scenes, and Elizabeth and John the Baptist born. Then you have chapter 3, you have the baptism of John the Baptist, where he is declared the Son of God, and then he's driven into the wilderness in chapter 4 to be tempted by the devil. So I want to pick up when he comes out of the wilderness and go through just a quick review of what has happened so far. So, chapter 4, it begins verse 14, where he goes about in the power of the Spirit to Galilee, and he goes to all his town. He starts with Nazareth. And if you can remember what he does in Nazareth when he's there in the synagogue, he opens the text. And what does he read, if you remember?
Isaiah 61.
Yeah, Isaiah 61, right? He opens the scroll to Isaiah. And why don't we read that one more time? Liz, would you read that for us? 18 and 19. This is
Sure.
what he reads.
The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim liberty to the captives and recovering of the sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor.
So this is really important. This is where he begins, and his very first reference of what you're wondering what he says when he goes into the synagogue. And Luke tells us on this occasion he goes there and this prophecy has been fulfilled. This is now the year of the Lord's favor. This is now good news is being proclaimed. God is no longer angry with his people. Now, the whole purpose of this mission is salvation, to set at liberty captives, to bring sight to the blind, to set people free. Good news. This is the year of the Lord's favor. Beautiful thing. And that's going to define everything he does. And so the next scenes right there is they are kind of shocked by it. And of course, the people of Nazareth don't take very well to Jesus. And if you remember why, they took some offense at him. We could say a twofold offense. The first offense was, as it says here in verse 22, um, as they heard him speak. What's their offense?
Isn't this Joseph's son? What's up with this?
Come on, we know this guy. This is Joseph, little Joey Jr., right? This is Joseph's son here. I mean, who is he? We know him. This is his hometown. They know him. They've seen him. He's not a stranger to them. He's not a prophet coming out of the wilderness. They've grown up with him. They've seen him. They don't think much of him at this point. And then they want him to do miracles there like he did in other places, and he won't. He won't appease them with signs and wonders and try to convince them through that. And he convicts them, he compares them to the wickedness of the days of Elijah and Elisha. And so they didn't take too kindly to that. And so what do, if you remember how that scene ends?
They try to throw him off a cliff.
Yeah, they try to throw him off the cliff. And he just walks away from them. His time hasn't come yet. He goes to Capernaum next, another nearby city. This is where Peter lives. What does he encounter in the synagogue, if you remember, in Capernaum?
Somebody with the devil in him, a demon.
Yeah, he starts here. The first thing he does there is he casts out an unclean demon in a man, and showing his power. Again, you can see fulfilling what he said. I've come to set the captives free, liberty to those who are oppressed. And here clearly is one oppressed by the evil one. And he commands the demons, and they're shocked, the authority that he has over the unclean spirits. Then he goes and he heals Simon's mother-in-law. And if you remember, the way that he heals and the way that he casts out the demons is by his word, rebuking them, showing his command and authority. When all the people come to him now to be healed and freed from their demons and diseases, how does he heal them, if you remember, at the end of chapter 4? think that's chapter 4.
He lays his hands on them.
Lays his hands on every one of them. If you remember that, healed them, showing his love and personal attention to everyone. He's not too busy for them. Absolute command, absolute love. This is the year of the Lord's favor. This is setting the captives free. Everything he said is true. And these are all signs and evidence of that. Okay, so then he departs and he says, my mission is now I need to go and preach the good news to all the towns. And that was the end of chapter 4. And chapter 5, we pick it up there, and we have this scene with Simon. If you remember with the fish, what was that story, if you remember? What was that miracle that Jesus does?
Peter had been out, or Simon had been out all night fishing, and they come back in, and Jesus says, go out and put it off on this side. And they argue because they were out all night.
Yeah.
Then they go out and they catch so much that the boat starts to sink. And then Peter falls to his knees and calls him Lord.
Yeah, it's a kind of miracle that shows the full authority of Christ in commanding the wind, the waves, the sea creatures, in creating fish, I suppose, so that Simon realizes he is not in the presence of some prophet, but the Lord himself. And like Isaiah says, depart from me, I'm a sinful man, woe to me. And Jesus comforts him, you'll be catching men from now on. You're going to join me in this now. All right, then he has this leprosy thing happens. Now, this is an important one. What happened with the leper? And this is going to kind of follow through with what we're going to talk about next. If you remember what happened, a leper comes to Jesus.
He says, if you will it, you could heal me.
Yeah. And how does Jesus heal him?
Touches him.
He touches him. Yeah. Now, why is that significant that he touches him? Makes him clean by touching him.
Because normally when clean things touch unclean things, they become unclean, but Jesus remained clean after touching the leper.
Yes. He is of a certain level of holy. He's of a different nature here, such that when he touches the unclean, he does not become unclean. The unclean person becomes clean, which is amazing. You think about that. That's not how filth works. Filth corrupts and taints whatever it touches. Filth has the power over that which is clean, except in Jesus' case, in which the holy trumps the filthy and overcomes it. Something that they have not seen before. So, last time I think we got into the next scene. Now we have a scene with the paralyzed man coming to him. Jesus does something else that is surprising. As they bring a paralyzed man, they knock through the roof, they drop the man down before him, and Jesus doesn't heal him right away, does he? But what does he do?
Says your sins are forgiven.
Says your sins are forgiven. You can see the kind of connection here. You have the leper who's cleansed of his leprosy when he comes into contact with Jesus. Simon Peter at the beginning of chapter 5, feeling this conviction of sin, and then Jesus comforting him. I'm a sinful man. No, I'm not going to depart from you. You've come follow me. I've redeemed you for my purposes. This leper is now healed and brought back to the community, and he's cleansed. And now this man, this paralyzed man, we don't know what his sins are, but Jesus says they're forgiven.
Okay.
And to prove they're forgiven, he sets the man walking on his way to show that he has the authority to forgive sins. And so these are extraordinary things that are happening here. These are not the normal ways that prophets dealt with people. We've seen Elijah in the Old Testament do miracles and wonders of different sorts, but not like this. There's something different about the way Jesus ministers. So let's pick it up here, and we now have the scene with Levi. Let's read that one more time. Verses 27 down to 32. Let's see. Elizabeth, would you read this for us? 27 down to 32.
After this, he went out and saw a tax collector named Levi sitting at the tax booth. And he said to him, "Follow me." And leaving everything, he rose and followed him. And Levi made him a great feast in his house. And there was a large company of tax collectors and others reclining at table with them. And the Pharisees and the scribes grumbled at his disciples, saying, "Why do you eat and drink with tax collectors and sinners?" And Jesus answered them, "Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance."
Okay. All right. So we talked a little bit last time. We started into it a little bit, the tax collectors. And we said that these were Jews who collected for the Romans. They extorted money from their own people. Many cases, the tax collectors, these were the worst of the worst, the most despised, and rightfully so, of the Jewish people. I mean, they were really scoundrels in many ways. Levi's call. So Levi, a tax collector. I want you to notice something about his calling here. How does Jesus call him? Or let's say, when or where does he call him?
Right in his booth, his tax booth.
Yeah.
So
That word.
Jesus goes to him. Levi does not seek him out. And he goes to him while he is sitting at his booth. So the man is in the midst of his life, his miserable life, and Jesus goes to him, gives him the command. And what's the command he gives him?
Follow me.
Follow me. And Levi's response?
Gets up and goes.
Yes. Leaves everything, rises and follows him. All right. That's pretty amazing. So there's that first scene here. But again, notice carefully here. Levi did not come to Jesus. Levi didn't leave everything and come and find Jesus and say, "I want to be your disciple." He doesn't even presume anything. Jesus comes to him, says, "Follow me," and Levi leaves everything. All right. The next thing we have is this Levi's, we'll call it his banquet, Levi's feast. And tell me about this feast. So now Levi hosts in his house. And who's there?
Well,
A lot of tax collectors.
Yeah.
And others.
Yes, this is a large company. Tax collectors and others, whoever that are. And along with Jesus. So Levi hosts a meal now as he follows Jesus. Now Levi, being a tax collector, he has some wealth, so he has a large place, and he's able to have a large company of people over to his home. This is the first thing he does now, and Jesus is there, and he invites all his friends. This large company of tax collectors and others are reclining with Jesus now. Pharisees and scribes are concerned. What's their concern? The Pharisees and scribes grumble.
I'm wondering why he's hanging out with the tax collectors and the sinners.
Yeah. Why do you eat with tax collectors and sinners? Why are they offended by that?
Because they are unclean in a sense.
Yeah. Yeah. Are they right to, let's just say, are they right to be concerned?
Yeah, I would think so. I think that, you're hanging out with the worst of the worst. It's like you become who you hang out with.
Yeah. And what does it mean to eat with someone like this in this kind of setting, to recline with them?
It's intimate.
Yeah. So basically it's
They're
go
accepted.
ahead.
They're accepted.
Yeah. So Jesus is accepting sinners like this. And by sinners and tax collectors, we don't mean we're all sinners. We all have our issues and stuff like that. But we're talking about the reprobates. This is bad company. Accepting, look, I'm going to call them, instead of sinners and tax collectors, we'll call them bad company. You know what we're talking about here. There's certain, it's like, how do you feel when your son or daughter is hanging out with the gang, with drug dealers? You okay with that? Or when your daughter's hanging out with the floozies, these promiscuous girls in school? Do you like that? How we feel about that?
Mm.
We're concerned about it, because if you're eating with them or sitting or thinking about, like, going back to high school at the lunch tables, that's a good picture of it here. Yeah, everyone sat with their kind at their lunch tables here, and you had the druggies at one table, the nerds at another table, the jocks at another table, and you sit with your kind. And when you sit with them and eat with them, and they eat with you, you're accepting one another. It's a sign of peace, and that you approve of each other. Why is Jesus here? And that's the question. He is not eating with reformed tax collectors and sinners. The Pharisees would not have a problem with Jesus eating with former tax collectors, guys who had left it. But these are people who are currently serving in this capacity. There may have been prostitutes in the mix, or drunkards, or all sorts of reprobate people here, filthy folks, that are not good company. They're not reformed. They are miserable people. And they've been invited to this feast, and Jesus is eating with them. Jesus' answer is very significant here,
Yeah.
of why do you eat with them? And what does he say? See, verse 31 and 32.
Basically, he says those who have no need for a doctor, he doesn't need to go to them. He goes to the ones that need to be healed.
Yeah. If you want to understand, this is so important to understand for Jesus's ministry and how he operates. And we're going to talk much more about that. This is the answer to understand, because what he's doing is not something is not something he's not this is not commending it to us all. It's not something that you would say to someone. Jesus hung out with prostitutes and tax collectors and sinful people, so you should be hanging out with tax collectors and prostitutes and sinful people too. That's not the takeaway from this. He says, I'm different from you here. How does he describe himself?
Physician?
Yeah, Jesus is the physician. The sinners are the sick, right? If you understand it that way, it's like when there are sick people, they need a doctor. The doctor hangs out with sick people. Should you be hanging out with sick people? Well, typically we say if you're healthy, you don't necessarily want to hang out with sick people, because then you're going to get sick, right?
Mm.
But there's the exception. Like during the pandemic of COVID, the wisdom was, when someone's got COVID, you stay away from them until they're clear, so you don't get sick, because it's so contagious. The
Isolation.
only exception is the doctors. The doctors, because they can treat the sick person, are the ones who have access to the sick that other people do not have. Jesus comes, presents himself. Look, I'm the physician. I am, as you saw with the leper, when I come into the presence of a leper, I don't get leprosy. I cleanse leprosy. Therefore, I come into their presence. For you, Pharisees and scribes and others, yeah, when you touch a leper, you get leprosy. But when I touch a leper, I cleanse it. And so I'm the doctor, and these sinners are the sick. And so those who are sinful, I have the authority to forgive sins. I have the authority to cleanse lepers. That's why I come into their company before they even repent, before they even show any signs of life whatsoever. I come into their company. I sit with them. I eat with them because I'm the physician. And the fact is, those who have no need of a physician, those who are well, have no need of a physician. What's the point of a doctor hanging out with people that aren't sick, right? If you start thinking about it, just the physician, the sinners are sick, and let's say the righteous Pharisees are the well. Those, they don't need a physician. They don't need me, and frankly, they don't want me,
Mhm.
right? If
Right.
you're well, you don't want to see a doctor. Who wants to see a doctor? How many of you look forward to your doctor's appointments? I mean, unless you're sick and in pain and misery and want relief, it's like I hate going to the doctor. I hate going to the dentist. I hate these things. I don't want to be around them unless I'm sick. Unless I feel sick, then I want them. And same thing with them. The Pharisees and the scribes are the well, those who they don't need, or at least they don't feel they need a physician, a savior. So that's why they don't want his company. But these sinners, they're the ones I go to. What do you make of his phrase here? I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance. That's how he kind of sums it up here. And
He might as well call them a brood of vipers. He just didn't go down that road yet, but you know who he's addressing.
who are the righteous?
They think they're righteous.
Right.
Pharisees.
The Pharisees.
And we could even, the way he frames it is, but sinners to repentance. Yeah, let's just say that there was such a thing as righteous people. He didn't come for them because they don't need forgiveness. Everything's good. So for those who deem themselves the righteous, I didn't come for you. But I came for sinners. And I think that's going to be important. So for those who, remember, good news, if we recall, was preached not to the rich, but to the poor. We go back to chapter 4. Let me pull it up again. I keep coming back to that because I think it's really important. It's good news is to the poor. Liberty is not to the free, but to the captives. Sight is not given to those who already see, it's given to the blind. Liberty is not for those who are comfortable, but for those who are oppressed. That's what this good news is for. And so unless you see yourself in those categories, you will never accept and understand Jesus and receive him. And you'll just be offended by it because you don't see yourself in those categories. They saw the Messiah as someone who came for the righteous to save them. And that's why the Pharisees' business was all about them being as righteous as possible and getting the people to be as righteous as possible. So they kept calling the people to reform. You need to reform. You need to fast more. You need to pray more. You need to get right. You need to obey the Sabbath more. All these outward commandments that they required of people. And the idea was that when we're good enough, when we have shown ourselves of good faith and good enough, then the Christ will come and bring us over the top. And Jesus says, no, that's not how this works. You don't make yourself well enough and then say, when I feel good enough, then I'll go see the doctor. That's not how it works. When you're miserable, you go see the doctor. He makes you well. You don't try to make yourself well or clean yourself up before you get the help that you need. Very important to get that. So I've not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance. And now the next part, I think, this will help us understand the next section, which can be a little confusing sometimes. So let's read our next passage. Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to say something that is one of the notes I have in my study Bible. It said that Levi was Matthew before he was converted?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, Levi, it's I wouldn't say he changed his name. They often have a couple names for guys like Simon, Peter, Saul, and Paul. They often have double names. And so Levi is the same person as Matthew. You're correct. Absolutely. All right. Let's pick it up here. Next section here, 33 down to 39. Rob, would you get that for us?
Okay. And they said to him, the disciples of John fast often and offer prayers, and so do the disciples of the Pharisees, but yours eat and drink. And Jesus said to them, can you make wedding guests fast while the bridegroom is with them? The days will come when the bridegroom is taken away from them, and then they will fast in those days. He also told them a parable. No one tears a piece from a new garment and puts it on an old garment. If he does, he will tear the new, and the piece from the new will not match the old. And no one puts new wine into old wineskins. If he does, the new wine will burst the skins, and it will be spilled, and the skins will be destroyed. But new wine must be put into fresh wineskins. And no one, after drinking old wine, desires new, for he says the old is good.
All right. So we'll start with the question. Who asked the question? They said to him.
The Pharisees.
Yeah, it's a question from the Pharisees. Okay.
33.
And the question is this. Well, what is their question?
How come you don't fast? Everyone else does.
Yeah. Not only do we, but why do the disciples of John, because he's good, right? Disciples of John and the Pharisees fast often, and they had and offer prayers. Obviously, Jesus' disciples also offer prayers, but they don't fast. Yours eat and drink. Why do you and your disciples eat and drink? That's the question. Jesus gives a very interesting response to this, and I think it will help in understanding his mission, his ministry here. He says in verse 34 and 35, he gives three pictures for them to understand what's going on here. But the first one I think is very, very important. 34 and 35. What's his answer to that? His first response.
You don't fast when the bridegroom is still with you.
Yeah. Fasting. I'll put it this way. Fasting is not for weddings. You don't fast when you go to a wedding. Yeah, Rob.
No, I was going to say, I think, you have brought up Daniel 7 before, the Son of Man phrase with Daniel 7 and how that would set them off. If he claims to be the Son of Man, he's claiming deity.
Yeah.
And they know that. And that would be, Christ does that several times in different ways. He proclaims his deity, if you read between the lines, and it sets them off. Isaiah 62:5 says that God is the bridegroom. And Israel, it's a great passage, and Israel is the bride. And so they would see that God, I can't believe how much my phone is ringing, man.
Yeah.
They would see that his claim to be the bridegroom is a claim to deity, and that would set them off.
Yeah. Isaiah 62:5, that's what it is?
Yeah.
Do you have that in front of you? What it says there? I want to get a quick read on that. I'll try to find it real quick. Isaiah 62:5. Let me see if I can find it real quick. He says, as a young man marries a young woman, so shall your sons marry you. And as the bridegroom rejoices over the bride, so shall your God rejoice over you. That's great. Jesus is your God. I lost you there, Rob. You're on mute.
You must have taken a phone call.
Okay.
There we go. Yeah, so they would, as the bridegroom rejoices over the bride, so your God rejoices over you. So they saw God as the bridegroom. And here is Christ identifying himself as the bridegroom.
Yeah. Yeah. And so this is the time, and they are the wedding guests. They've come, and so this is beautiful. But I want to start with this: is there is I have a little phrase here. We'll call it. You've heard this: is timing is everything. You've heard that phrase before, right?
Yeah.
And there is a time, if you remember in Ecclesiastes, there's a time for everything under the sun. There's a time to be born, a time to die. There's a time to rejoice, a time to mourn. You know the whole thing. To every season, there is a time for everything. And so we'll talk about two significant events, two major events in life that bring people together. What do they say when you've lost touch with your friends and family, and then they make a note that you only see them when at these two things:
Weddings and funerals.
weddings and funerals, right? These are the two. There are weddings and there are funerals. These are your two life-changing, these are the two major events of life. These are days of rejoicing, and funerals are days of mourning. And for those who are rejoicing, we'll say this, for the weddings, this is the time of feasting. Not fasting. It's a time to eat and drink. Funerals, this is the time of fasting as you're mourning the loss of those you loved. I know we eat at funerals today, but this is the pattern is that, in days of weddings, there's great joy. This is the time to celebrate. This is the time to feast and eat and drink and have a great time to dance and sing. Funerals, no. That's the time to fast, to mourn, to weep. That's a different tone altogether, and you have to get it right. And this is the biggest offense. This is why Jesus is, we'll see in a second, why this is where he clashes with the Pharisees. It's all about timing. They all believe in the scriptures. They believe in the Lord. They believe the Messiah is coming, and they all believe this, but the difference is the timing. So for the Pharisees and disciples of John before Jesus comes over, what kind of timing, how did they see the world? What was the time for the Pharisees? For the Pharisees, this is a time for what?
Well, for mourning, I guess.
Yeah. A time for mourning and fasting. Because this is the day, these are still the days of indignation when God has sent us off and forsaken us. But Jesus has been saying all along from the beginning, what has he been preaching?
Good news.
Yeah, it's a time for rejoicing, feasting. These are the days of God's favor. Now, it's all about timing, and that's why they're having trouble. Their whole business, the Pharisees are morticians, if you will. They run funeral homes. They're in the business of mourning. They're in the business of sadness and repentance and fasting. They fast more than anybody else. They're in that business. They're not in the business of rejoicing. And so when Jesus comes, rejoicing, feasting. Remember, even in the Gospel of John, the very first sign that he gives is at the wedding of Cana.
Mm.
They cannot receive it. They're having a hard time with this one here. But timing is everything, and so that's why it's like, how do you take it if you have a wedding? How do you receive it when there is a table of guests at your wedding who refuse to eat or drink anything? They just sit there. They don't dance. They don't move. They just sit there with glum faces. They don't eat any food or drink any of the drinks. How do you take that?
Not well.
Oh, yes. You kick them out, right? No. Get out of here. Because they're ruining it for everybody.
Yeah.
There's a cloud over this thing, right? It's like, no, you don't deal with that. On the other side, if it's a funeral, and at the funeral, there's a whole section, a whole family of people at this funeral just joking with each other, laughing and reveling and drinking and stuffing their faces, and while everyone is in black and mourning, it's like same thing. It's like, no, that's not the place. You got it all wrong. This is what's happening here. So they don't understand that this is something has changed with his coming. Jesus is not just another prophet like John, who's foretelling about what's going to come. He's the Lord who has come, and this is the day of favor. So now he gives a couple analogies to this. He gives two. He tells them a parable. What's the first parable he tells them? This is verse 36.
Using new cloth in an old garment.
Yeah. So we'll call this here. He says there are two parables. What's the point of the first one here? The new cloth
Yeah.
does not go on an old garment.
Yeah, times have changed.
Yeah.
In the days of indignation, as you said earlier, mourning would be fine, but it does not jive now.
Yeah, exactly right. Something new is happening here. You don't take a piece of new cloth and attach it to an old garment. Why don't you do that?
Because it shrinks, for one thing, it says in another passage, and it rips the hole even bigger.
Exactly right, because the cloth, once you wash it and dry it out, that cloth shrinks, and then it tears. It's not made for that. And he gives a similar analogy. What's the next one he gives?
Putting new wine in an old skin.
New
Right.
wine does not go. What happens? You know what happens there with new wines and how that works?
It expands
Yeah. And why is that a problem for old wineskins?
as they've dried up.
The dried up skins burst as the wine expands. So you can't just take what they want to do is take what Jesus is doing without changing their whole perspective on everything. And they just want to fit him into their system and make it work. So look, we're fasting and mourning. You should be fasting and mourning with us. And what happens is there's this tearing, there's a bursting, it's a violent response. It tears it apart. Their system and their whole worldview of the old covenant, of the whole temple and all the law and all that they lived under cannot contain the Messiah who's come now and is setting up a new covenant, a new way. And so this is it tears and shrinks. And so you think about it, it's like this was the challenge for the church in the book of Acts, is that all of a sudden things that were acceptable, that were required in the old covenant, are now not allowed in the new covenant. Can you think of some things in the old covenant that were required of the Jews in the old covenant, but in the new
Sacrifice.
covenant, they're now an abomination? Sacrifice, right? Sacrificing of goats and bulls and animals. Why were they required in the old covenant?
Because you had to put your sin on that animal and have a blood sacrifice for the redemption of your sin.
Yeah. And why are they forbidden then in the new covenant?
Because Jesus was a holy sacrament.
Because now it's like if you do it, it's not just about cruelty to animals. It's about you are saying that the cross of Christ was not sufficient, that there needs to be further sacrifices of that. What are some other things that are forbidden in the old covenant that are now required in the new? Can you think of anything else besides sacrifices?
Food.
Well, food was optional, but yeah, you have a strict diet in the Old Testament. You're not required to do that. But there's something actually would have been an abomination in the Old Testament, which now becomes a requirement in the New Testament. If you can remember, What was the relationship to the Gentiles in the Old Covenant?
Oh yeah, okay.
Separation.
Yeah,
Mm.
separation. You are not to eat with the Gentiles, to separate with them. And then suddenly Christ comes, the wall of hostility is torn down, and suddenly we're required to have fellowship with other nations, to welcome that he's made the two one now. It's a new day. Things that, again, same thing with the weddings and the funerals, things that are required in one are an abomination in the other, and vice versa. And so we can kind of see that playing out here. It's all about timing. He says something at the end, though, that new wine, verse 38, must be put into fresh wineskins. And no one after drinking old wine desires new, for he says the old is good.
Mhm.
What do you think? What do you think of that?
He's basically saying the Pharisees aren't going to change their mind because they believe in the old way and they don't want to learn the new way.
Yeah, yeah, I'm curious. This is a really interesting phrase. Um, those who drink. Let me see if I got a note on this. Anyone have a note on that one, by the way? That's what's in.
I get the approved solution, Pastor, but I have to look it up.
All right. Says no one is best understood as an ironical condemnation of the Pharisees who favored the past and reject the arrival of the kingdom in the new covenant. Why is the old preferred?
It's known. And they are lifted up in it. They're looked upon as being more righteous.
Yeah, yeah. They are, let me put it this way. They are the kings in the funeral business here, if you will.
My note,
Go ahead.
says, those who had acquired a taste for the old covenant ceremonies and Pharisaic traditions were loath to give them up for the new wine of Jesus's teachings.
Yeah. Yeah. They have mastered the old ways and the disciplines. And so they judged other people based upon them as well. Now, to give them up, I mean, to follow Christ is to embrace the new. And that now suddenly the masters become the apprentice. Become the apprentice in order to
Not needed anymore.
Yeah, they have to they have to do what Paul did. Remember what Paul said in Philippians chapter 3 about he looked at his life of righteousness and all the things that he had to commend himself, Pharisee of Pharisees. And what does he say?
It was like dung.
Garbage.
Yeah, they had to be like Paul and say all my righteousness is trash compared to the surpassing greatness of knowing Christ. That is so hard. It's you can begin to understand why the hostility is almost uniform among the Pharisees. You've devoted yourself to this system here, and now you're telling me it's kind of like I have been, just think of I don't know if you ever were Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts, and you've devoted yourself to scouting now, and you've earned your badges. And then suddenly you just become the Eagle Scout, the highest badge that there is, and just you're so proud of everything you've accomplished. And then someone comes along and says, "Oh yeah, regarding that, we don't accept that anymore. There's a new thing, a new program that we're doing, and you'll start at the bottom with everybody else." Like you could say, "No, no, no, no. I've what do they call it? Sunk cost. I have devoted all my life that I will cling to the death. I will rather say, I'd rather lie to myself and live in deception than give up all that I have earned, all that I have accomplished." And so it really is. It's or what are the analogy of the sunk cost when you get that lemon of a car and after you've poured $10,000 into it, it's really hard to let it go when you realize you got to junk it, man. You got to junk it. And like, I've put too much into this. You can't let it go. So anyway, I hope that helps kind of understanding sort of the challenge, the testing. I kind of reading it, I have a little sympathy for the Pharisees, a little understanding of why this is so difficult for them, um, and why it's just difficult for all of us. And so it's why it's easy for the the sinners, the poor, those who have nothing to give up, to follow Christ, and why it's so hard for the rich, for those who are um, well established, those who have made a life for themselves to follow Christ. You can kind of begin to see it a little bit here.
Human pride is huge.
Yeah.
You have to be a part of your victory. To get it by grace is difficult for human pride.
Yeah. There's one last thing we forgot to talk about. What does Jesus mean in verse 35? That the days will come when the bridegroom is taken away from them, and then they will fast in those days.
Hmm?
He's
What you make
talking
of
about the cross.
Yeah.
It's definitely that. That the when the I suspect that we know that when Christ was taken to the cross, those few days before his resurrection, they were in great grief and trouble, and I suppose they didn't eat very much at that point. Um, but is that saying that there's no place for fasting for us um, going forward? I know that fasting was a regular practice of the Jews at that time. Is fasting an appropriate practice for Christians today?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Why so? How so? What's the purpose?
The bridegroom is gone.
Okay.
Well, also trying to get closer to the bridegroom to um, just be focused totally on them and not on whatever you normally do, whatever you're fasting from.
So we are like they were doing the fasting is a when you're fasting, you're hungry, and it's kind of physically aligning your body with your soul so that your soul is hungering for something, you're longing for something. And so sometimes fasting can be very helpful in expressions of prayer as expressions of longing for something or someone. And so for them, yeah, they were longing for the Messiah to come and for the day to come. And now he's come and he's restored. So it's not the time. But then he says, I will be taken away from them, and then we'll fast from those days. So now it's like we are longing for something here. Christ has come, he has redeemed us. But what are we longing for right now?
The bridegroom to return.
Yeah. And what happens when he returns?
Well,
Gonna put
peace.
an end to evil.
Peace, the end of evil, right? We're longing for that, for the end of all evil, the resurrection from the dead. There'll be no more death or mourning or pain, all things made new. We're longing for us to be in the very presence of God. And though he's accomplished everything that we need, there's still this time now of waiting. And so there are times when we feel that longing more intensely than others. And there's time for fasting even today. And you're going to see that in the New Testament. There are a couple examples of people fasting. Anyone remember a time when the church fasted in the New Testament?
Yeah, in Acts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
When Peter was in jail.
Was he in jail when they fast? I can't remember if they mentioned fasting then. But there's one case is in Acts chapter 13, where the church is in Antioch, and there's been great persecution in Jerusalem. James has been killed. Peter was imprisoned. Paul had already done his persecution, but basically the Christians have been cast out of Jerusalem, and now they're starting anew in Antioch, and that's where they're first called Christians. And it's at that point it says they gathered together and they were worshiping and fasting and praying. And the Lord spoke to them and said, "Set apart for me, Paul." So they're kind of like longing, hungry. They don't know what to do. They're sort of in a everything is up in the air. We don't know what to do next. We don't know where to go. and a longing for that kind of direction. So there's places for that. But so in this time, he's basically saying, look, there's when I'm with them, when I'm physically with them, this is the day of rejoicing. But I'll be taken away from them, and then they'll fast, implying he'll also return, and all things will be made right and new. And it's interesting in Revelation, it does speak about the when Christ returns as the wedding of the Lamb
Yeah.
and the bride. So a fitting end to that. All right. So we'll end it there. It's a good place to end today. Any last comments or questions before we break? Okay.
I'd just say, Michael, in this Bible I've got in front of me here, they have an interesting take on verse 39. It says that the unfermented wine is much better for one's health and conduct, but the half intoxicated man would not say so.
Say that one more time.
The unfermented wine is much better for one's health and conduct, but the half intoxicated man would not say so.
Oh, so the new wine is not yet fermented,
So the new
and the
wine
old
better
wine
for you,
is
New wine's
fermented.
better
This is
for
why
you,
it's much preferred.
but one that's half intoxicated wouldn't recognize that. So-
Okay. All right. It's interesting. I didn't think about that. Very interesting. All right.